everyone hear me? Yes. So I'm very excited to moderate this forum. I think Zero Trust is definitely one of the top topics right now. We have an amazing panel here to discuss the topics. Another reason that I'm very excited about this is also within ACT-IAC. We just recently released a paper around Zero Trust. Hopefully we'll have a link up here for you to be able to see where to go for that. And if you can't, you can always go to the ACT-IAC website. From a professional perspective, Chief Information Security Officer for ASRC Federal. Within ACT-IAC, I serve as the program chair for the Cyber COI and was also the entry chair on that paper around Zero Trust. So if you're looking for a place to call home outside of the network COI, please come to the Cyber COI and see what you can get out of that program. I'm going to let the various panel members introduce themselves. So please introduce yourself, what you do, and what your involvement is around Zero Trust.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us today. My name is Stephen Hernandez. Day job, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Department of Education. The ancillary other duties is assigned. I'm the co-chair of the Federal CISO Council with Grant Schneider. On the ACT-IAC side, I'm the government chair of the Cybersecurity Community of Interest, and I'm the government co-chair for the Zero Trust Working Group. So, good morning. Thank you for joining us, and I'll pass it on to Lisa.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Lorenzen. I'm Director of Emerging Technology Solutions at Zscaler, and I have been trying to solve the problem of connecting users to applications for about 20 years in the IT and cybersecurity space. Previously with NetScreen/Juniper/Pulse Secure, if any of that sounds familiar, doing VPN and NAC. But prior to that, on the private side, with Blue Cross Blue Shield in North Carolina as a consultant for US EPA. So I'm excited about Zero Trust. That's quite a face. Sorry, did I surprise you? Anyway, I focused on Zero Trust because I believe we now have the technology to deliver secure access in a way that was never feasible before. We had the concepts, but trying to implement it was very difficult. And I think that's finally starting to change. So I'm excited to be here.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Blake from the NOAA, National Oceanic Administration. I'm the director of the Enterprise Network Program Office and the government COI or government chair for the NNT COI and co-chair with Steve for the Zero Trust effort here.
Morning, everybody. I'm Sean Frazier with Duo Security, now part of Cisco. I legally have to say that. I've been working with these fine folks on the Zero Trust white paper for ACT-IAC for a while, and I, like Lisa, believe that we're at an interesting time where we actually can deliver this capability, whereas 10 years ago when we first started, it was a great concept, but it really wasn't a full capability. So I'm excited to be working on this. What I do for advisory CISO for Duo, what that is it's I have a large title with little responsibility, and I travel a lot. That's pretty much what I do in the end.
All right, so we'll go ahead and start with our first question. So Zero Trust is obviously, there's a lot of buzz around it, and it is a buzzword. You probably could, if you go into a conference, it could be one of your bingo chips that you could use your BS bingo that you could do in a conference. So the question I have right now is, with all that buzz, how would you describe Zero Trust, what it really is today, and how would you compare that to all of the conversation and marketing that's going around Zero Trust? You go to RSA, probably 9% of the vendors now are all Zero Trust vendors, whereas before they were AV vendors or SIM vendors. So can you speak to what do you think Zero Trust is today, and how would that play out in your organization?
All right, guys, I guess I'll lead. So I think you hit the nail on the head where you were talking about, every vendor now has Zero Trust slapped on something. It's one of the kind of necessary things that, yes, we have to say we do this. One of the interesting facets of the working group, and if you download the paper and read through it, what you'll find is that we started with the task from the CIO Council of looking at specifically Zero Trust networking and software-defined networking. We were actually originally scoped around some fairly specific items. And when we started to look at those specific technologies and capabilities, yeah, the market is actually fairly mature in that space, and there's a lot of great capability in that space. But then we started looking at the holistic enterprise picture. So for example, I look at my department. And I say, well, ZTN is part of this, and software-defined network is part of this, but if I'm talking about truly integrating zero trust, that's a broader conversation. And it's a conversation that's more of a philosophy and a framework than it is an actual technology. Technologies absolutely need to support and plug in along the way here, but this is a different way of doing business, and it's a different way of thinking about business. And I think that was the biggest eye-opener for us as we started to unpack this question in the working group was, we have to shift from these specific technological areas around layer 3 and actually start looking at the OSI stack holistically and saying, all the way from the user down to, in some cases, even supply chain assurance, we have to be talking about where these fit into the zero trust mindset so that we can get to that place where we have that high assurance and trustworthiness that we're looking for.
So I think when you look at zero trust, it's almost as much about what it isn't as about what it is, right? So it is not a product, and as much as marketing people will tell you, if you go to RSA and walk the show floor, they will not sell you zero trust because they cannot sell you zero trust. What they can sell you is products that fit into that framework. Zero trust is a mindset, it's a framework. We tried very specifically to kind of call this out in the white paper, and I'm going to be selling this white paper all day long because it was awesome and we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that. It is much to kind of separate the marketing fluff from the actual what it is. And what it is, fundamentally, is it's a direct conversation between a user and an application on the device, right?
And the other thing that came out was the data. We have to talk about the data. We have to understand our data. We have to understand how our users interact with that data and how important that data is to our mission. If we can't answer that fundamental question, then don't even start down the zero trust path, because you're going to spend a lot of money on very expensive capability that's incredible. It can do amazing things, but you're probably going to DDoS yourself before you actually deliver something that looks like zero trust.
So I'm going to go a slightly different direction and say that zero trust is a misnomer. You start off by not implicitly trusting anyone, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to figure out who we can trust, how we know we can trust them, and what we trust them to do or to access. So I'm really happy to see zero trust having this uptick of interest, but I feel that it's almost leading us to focus in the wrong place. And the place that we need to focus is enabling seamless access, where there's full visibility for the back-end administrators and a comprehensive solution that allows them to control access regardless of where the resource resides and regardless of where the user is coming from. The thing that gets lost sometimes is the user experience. For me, zero trust is a way to ensure that the end user can get to whatever they need with as little friction as possible. And everything else is window dressing. How do we get there securely is important. How do we get there reliably is important, but at the end of the day, we need to take cybersecurity from the group that says no to the group that says yes, and I think that zero trust is the way that we do that.
I think it's a natural evolution of the technology catching up with the culture. As our workforce evolves, as our applications evolve, as our missions evolve, the technology is allowing us to change our architecture because it has evolved itself and is enabling that.
Sean said the cloud is just another data center, and that's true, but your data centers are also not going away, so it's processing all of the access throughout that transition.
And we're seeing a different generation of employees with different expectations, and we're able to meet and continue our work by enabling that, right? And the technology is there to do it securely, so why not enable it?
Okay, so recognizing that zero trust is not something that you go out and buy, that it is ultimately an architectural concept, how would you gauge the maturity of zero trust as something related to security architecture and actually being achievable within an organization?
I think zero trust can be scaled, right? I mean, the paper outlines the concept, but I think it can scale almost every one of the pillars to your agency and to your mission needs. The different levels of maturity of how it gets implemented within the organization is different, but I think as an architecture, it has quite a bit of flexibility to be applied to any agency.
Yeah, I think that's the point is it's meant to have flexibility. I mean, it's not a perfect architecture. It's an evolving architecture. And I always like to say that it's the inevitable security architecture for the world we find ourselves in now, which is cloud and mobile. I'm a big cloud and mobile guy. And I always say that cloud and mobile either happens with you or to you. And if it happens with you, you got to be thinking about how the security architecture adapts to that. And if you wait for the perfect architecture, you'll wait forever, just like everything else in technology, because all the technology moves and changes underneath you. It's like quicksand. So if you don't put a stake in the ground and try something and get yourself on that journey now, there's no better time than now.
I think the concept is extremely mature. I mean, you go back to the DISA Black Core concept or the Jericho Forum deperimeterization, but the implementation technologies, starting out trying to do this with 802.1x and radius and access proxies the way Google did with BeyondPort, that's a fantastic implementation if you're Google and you're a company run by engineers for engineers and you have unlimited resources, 7 years and 6 white papers worth of development. For everybody else, we need a more flexible and we need a technology that's a less heavy lift. And I think that technology, the software-defined perimeter solutions that are moving this query away from the network layer and up into the communication between the user and the application, that's where we start to see that technology maturing to a point where it's deployable. I would have told you 3 years ago that software-defined perimeter was nice slideware, but not really production-ready solution. And it's amazing how much can change in 3 years.
And even with all those resources, Google still have challenges, right? So they still called out in their white paper kind of where they fell down. They didn't anticipate kind of the user experience because they have a lot of developers that don't like security, right? And they think security is getting in the way, to your point.
Yes.
So even with all the money in the world and all the PhDs and IT in the world, they still had challenges. So if you think this stuff's going to be, cake and ice cream, it ain't cake and ice cream.
I'll say that in the research we discovered that as a framework and approach, we are definitely not the first, not the last that's going to look at this space. That's undeniable. In the federal space, we're going to continue to evolve how we understand this space and basically how that will start to influence our policies and how we start to look at overarching initiatives from DHS and OMB. From the agency perspective, when we look at it, to the points brought up earlier, most of the agencies, we're in legacy environments, and we know that IT modernization is one of the 3 legs of the president's management agenda. And so, to the point about Google, they started fresh and basically said, we can go wherever we want. The agencies don't have that luxury. And what we see is we have a fairly approach to zero trust. And within the layers of OSI, we have areas of very high maturity, especially in the vendor space in terms of capability. And where the agencies are really going to have to focus on is understanding, okay, I have a high value asset, maybe it's legacy. What layers and what capabilities can I start to map up with that high value asset to deliver more zero trust capability in that space? Where are my crown jewels at, those most important places? And then as we get better as the market matures, as more of the market can cover more of the OSI model, then we can start talking about how do we start to evolve that and grow that across the enterprise. But we can probably expect a fairly heterogeneous approach in the early phases because if you're a web-facing application, you know what? Layer 3 and up is going to be the bread and butter for you. It really is. If you're an internal asset and you're more focused on user behavior, you may be focused more on the ICANN and the identity and the behavioral perspectives of zero trust. So don't expect all agencies to put out one requirement that's going to say, yeah, I want zero trust. It's going to look different. It's going to feel different. But it's all going to probably have some intersection with zero trust.
That's a perfect segue into the next question. So organizational maturity is really important to address regardless of what kind of IT implementation you're engaging in. But from a organizational maturity related to information technology that's already existing within an organization, as well as organizational maturity around management processes, right? So how does IT interact with the mission side of the house? And does the mission side of the house understand the information and data that they own? So from an organizational maturity perspective, what are some of the things we should be thinking about from a zero trust perspective?
I think what is key there is, who said it, is the data, right? You have to understand the importance of your data and how you access it. So this goes back to your mission. And everybody has different kinds of missions. And that's why I think zero trust implementations will be very, will need to be very scalable. But when you look at organizational maturity, if you're trying to, actually Steve said this, if you're trying to implement something and you don't have your data under control, you're wasting your money. Because you'll never achieve any real advantages in zero trust. So it's not just a VPN, right? You're not just creating a new VPN into your infrastructure.
I'll say that from our perspective, back to that data conversation, we have a mantra in my group. It's the data dominance mantra. If there's data out there leading information about risk in my enterprise, I want it. I want it thorough, I want it accurate, I want it timely. And I've had some heart-to-hearts with some of my vendors that they don't necessarily want to give me access to the data about my risk that's in their tools. And that's a very frustrating conversation, and the road for the vendors that won't understand that necessity is going to be pretty bumpy in our area. But it's an absolute necessity, because when we talk about zero trust, we're talking about the control plane, we're talking about the data plane. And if I don't have visibility and access into both of those in near real time, I can't get zero trust to work in the way that I want it to. Continuous evaluation of a user through some media device accessing data. I need to be able to continuously evaluate that scenario. And if I don't have the data to do that in real time, I'm throwing good money after bad.
That's right.
So you can expect to see an emphasis on understanding how do we get to the data, the science behind the data, how do I start to paint this behavioral and operational picture with the data, and then have that data start to inform basically the zero trust engine that's going to start making decisions about what depth and breadth of access is allowed.
So I guess, I think that within organizations, there's a certain amount of zero trustiness that people already have, right? They don't even realize it. So I think part of the journey is kind of understanding what those things are. I'm also a big believer that data is everything, right? Because data is the thing that lives in the app that people have to go to and get. I wouldn't say wait until you understand every piece and minutia of your data before you start your journey, because it might take you a long time. You might want to do in parallel, right? You can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. But I think a maturity model and being able to look at, kind of where are we zero trusty, what can we leverage where we already have, because we all have legacy, right? We've done all this stuff. So figure out where you can leverage the stuff. Figure out where you're making your build versus buy decisions with cloud anyway, right? Do I build this thing in my data center, or do I buy it or subscribe to it in cloud? Make those decisions, and then think of that, from security architecture. How does zero trust pertain to that? How do I bring zero trust into that conversation as I'm building out new things and bringing up my legacy stuff?
Right, and Kurt mentioned, we have to support what we have now, even as we look to the future. And sometimes one of the best ways to do that is to look for a solution that will layer in and coexist with the current controls, the current legacy approaches to connecting users to applications. So it's really hard to envision this as a lift and shift, a forklift upgrade to your network security. It's going to be something that has to coexist over time. And looking at something that will provide an overlay and a glide path to say, okay, here's our biggest pain point. And we need to address this pain point, whether it's an alternative to a VPN, whether it is the ability to access application that's in multiple cloud providers, not just a single cloud provider, and the legacy data centers. And take this as a phased approach to say, we can get the low-hanging fruit, we can hit it right here, and that is a foundation to expand into additional areas that might be harder to do because we don't yet have the data classification or the visibility that we need. So it's definitely something that needs to be a journey that focuses both on the short-term and on the long-term goals.
Amen.
So our next question from a compliance perspective. So, some people consider compliance a dirty word. I think it's incredibly valuable. We have to be able to measure whether or not we're meeting our goals. But from a zero trust perspective, how do we take this new architecture, and do you have any guidance or suggestions or some examples or just some general thoughts around how we take this zero trust idea and move into having good compliance against it and actually make sure that we're getting great metrics and driving results with compliance?
Steve, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Former IG employee. So the interesting thing is that zero trust, if done well, along the way, if you're an Aristotle fan, the Kalan. Along the path of the good path, you will pick up all the necessary things you need. And Zero Trust has the potential to do that. For example, if you're going down Zero Trust, there's an emphasis on strong identity management. We need to know who the people are, or who the services are, or who the things are that are trying to access our data. And we need to understand the context around what these things, people, and services are. Well, that's all identity management. And frankly, a big chunk of that, especially on the people side, is already mandated as part of HSPD 12. We already need to vet people. We already need to prove their identity. We need to bind their identity biometrically to an authenticator. We've done all this already. And so the question is, once we start to integrate, if we do it right, we should be able to actually advance what we're doing in HSPD 12, automate it, and tie it into behavioral analysis, which is awesome from an insider threat perspective. And this checks many boxes, not only in the NIST space, but also what OMB is asking us to do, and a lot of the counterintelligence folks are asking us to do on the DNI side. So Zero Trust can drive a lot of the existing compliance programs that we already have. If we do it right and we link up the objectives, we can knock out a lot with Zero Trust.
And compliance is a spectrum too. I mean, there's user compliance with authorization requirements, there's endpoint compliance with security controls, there's behavior compliance for what people are trying to do on the network. So, you know, we had Comply to Connect, and I've had the good fortune to work in TCG with a lot of the NIST and NSA folks that were working on that initiative. And my impression from the outside was that Comply to Connect really revealed that it's too hard to establish full compliance before you allow something to connect to the network. So the focus shifted to connected and compliant. We're going to let you on the network, but we want to know what your state is. I think we need to support compliance, we need comprehensive visibility, which is something that a lot of the Zero Trust tools should bring as a byproduct of the controls that they offer. But at the same time, there has to be that recognition that full compliance is as hard to obtain as full classification. We need to support it all the way along.
And I think if you're working towards or have achieved the levels of compliance in the current requirements, then you've got the great foundation to moving your infrastructure to the next level. You're evolving that infrastructure to Zero Trust.
I think, Steve brought up HSPD 12, which is awesome, but it's also 15 years old, right? So one of the challenges we have is that all these things need to be updated. The cool thing is that they are. So if you look at what NIST is talking about with FIPS 201, they're talking about FIDO standards moving forward. They're talking about SAML and OAuth standards moving for federation. You look at the identity standards and the change with 63.3. You look at the OMB identity memo that's supposed to be up any day now. All of these things are kind of happening to basically allow agencies and organizations to move quicker, do it in a more risk-based way, while still being compliant, right? So don't have to do the letter of the law, this absolute thing, but give organizations the ability to take on risk based upon the fact that they're putting in this kind of Zero Trust framework around identity, around applications, around access.
So for Jeff, what do you think are the most likely tools that agencies may already have in their environments, and that they can leverage and build upon for looking at implementing a Zero Trust architecture in their organizations?
Well, Stephen mentioned, the identity management, ICANN infrastructure, endpoint management. These are all things that we've been, doing for years, different levels of implementation and maturity in that. And we're also doing analytics, right? All of these products are giving us different levels of analytics. So we're maturing in that. So the step into, kind of lost that. Steve?
Yeah. So we also have like continuous diagnostics mitigation, which frankly, from its inception, has it's asked some of the fundamental questions, same as Zero Trust. Who's on my network, and what devices are they using? How trustworthy are they? What vulnerabilities do they have? And so agencies have a lot of capability in that space as well. Additionally, any agency that's a little more forward in the cloud, you probably have capability in software-defined perimeter, software-defined networking, microsegmentation, and the ability to pull from the fabric of the cloud to understand how that's playing and how that's operating. So like if you're in AWS, you can use CloudWatch, CloudTrail to understand fundamentally what's happening in real time with a very networking fabric in your space. And that leads right into Zero Trust capability, because I want my Zero Trust engine to be able to start help driving those decisions, especially when, oh, I got an emergency threat indicator, adjust now. I can do that simultaneously in the Zero Trust model in the cloud.
So for the whole panel, based on that question, what's next? What would be your suggestions based on what was said? You know, are there any things that you think, based on your experience, that you've seen where you think there are some things there, or based on what Steve and Jeff said, you know, what's the maturity piece of that? Based on what's there, you know, is there anything related to when we're talking about analytics, automation, things like that? How would we take? What would be those next steps for a Zero Trust framework within agencies?
I would say, and this is a very personal, experience-based answer. When I started out at Juniper, we had Outlook and Exchange, and it was all on-premise, and I was a remote user. I accessed it over a traditional VPN. And when we were migrating to Office 365, I thought, great, this will make everything so much easier because I won't have to be on the VPN. I'll be able to get access to my email. Nope, we did source IP anchoring, and we had to go through the VPN to get into the data center, to get up to Office 365, to get back to the data center, to get back to the user. And I see that model playing out in so many environments where now we're moving applications into AWS and Azure. And again, go to the data center, go out through, out the resource, come back to the data center. The tick makes this even more painful and complex, frankly. So for me, the next step is to look at the technologies that have evolved in the private sector and to start to apply them to the public sector. That wasn't feasible for a long time. They didn't have the maturity and the reliability to make it something that the government could be comfortable in trusting these assets with. But now we're starting to see that cloud-based services are taking a lot of the infrastructure load off for delivering these kinds of functionality, that the ability to do alternate paths, that TIC 3.0 will allow us to look at alternate ways of carrying this traffic so that you can be simultaneously directly connected to a resource in the cloud and a resource in a data center without having to do that hairpin, but with the equivalent level of security, control, and visibility. So I really think that's what's next, is to start thinking our world for access is built on the assumption that the user is on-premise and the data is on-premise, because that's where we all started. If we're going to build a solution that reflects how we work today, where the user is mobile and the data is in multiple locations, what does that solution look like? And how do we scale it? How do we get the access to the data through it? And how do we get the visibility we need with it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny, because Darren and I were talking about this out in the hallway earlier, and that's, anyways, from Cisco here, I'll speak ill of Cisco. Sorry. So, my journey as part of this acquisition is obviously I work for Duo. Duo is a very zero trusty company, right? We're all about the cloud. We were born on the cloud, live on the cloud, probably die on the cloud. Cisco did the same thing, Office 365 migration, but they did the source IP thing, had to do and connect VPN to get through to that, and we just kind of said, no, we're not going to do that. This is kind of counter to what we do. And to their credit, they listen. So they're kind of doing that now, rolling it out without requiring VPNs. And like, oh yeah, you're right, that's kind of stupid. And we shouldn't have to come back to the network to get out to the cloud. It doesn't make any sense at all. So to Lisa's point, that's the awesome thing about TIC 3.0 is it's use case based. It's basically giving you permission to use cloud, because TIC 2.0 was 10 years old. Again, it's a 10-year-old thing. It made perfect sense back when the cloud was a baby. It doesn't make sense when the cloud's more mature.
Yeah, so ditto, and you can't reinforce the TIC 3.0 enough. If you're an agency in the room, know that OMB and DHS is willing to look at alternative solutions. Small Business Administration is an example where they had a great use case approved, and they're routing essentially all their TIC traffic through Azure right now. So it can be done, has been done. We have good proofs of concept. So if you're on the agency side, start thinking about where you may have those opportunities. If you're on the vendor side, working with an agency, start thinking about maybe how you can help them get there. Sometimes folks just haven't been asked the question or been presented with a potential opportunity to say, hey, have we thought about trying this? And then I'd also, from the maturity perspective, at the highest levels of maturity, when we're talking about being able to extend zero trust across the enterprise, there becomes a necessity to have a conversation about the modularization of zero trust components. And we have to start thinking about if the control engine, the control plane, and my technology are all in a single vendor, I'm either going to have more vendors, given the heterogeneous approach we're going to have to start, and that's going to get really messy when I start looking across the enterprise. So in the future, what we're really going to be looking at least from the agency perspective, is frankly, how do I modularize that? I have control plane capabilities, potentially across many vendors, but how can I modularize out, frankly, the Zero Trust engine if I need to, and even more so, add additional capabilities like AI and machine learning into that trust engine. So if you have a solution right now and it's all in one, that's probably good enough for today. But going forward, ask yourself, how am I going to interplay with several various and diverse control planes within an enterprise environment?
So the next question is, how would you gauge the implementability of Zero Trust? So, when you read articles, essentially some of the things we're talking about, it's the benefits, right? So tempering those benefits with wisdom. What are some of the things that would be things that are important to look at when you're implementing a Zero Trust architecture, where we would be looking at, here's some things that are going to be hard to do. And what are those things that would be pitfalls, hard to do, that you need to really plan for?
I think we talked about some of these things already. Basically do an assessment, kind of figure out where you're zero trustee already, figure out where you need those level of protections. I always say, you got to start the journey. The journey starts with the first step. The first step is kind of seeing where you are, the lay of the land, that things happen. I've seen this movie 3 or 4 times. I worked at a company called Netscape. I remember coming to government agencies saying, this internet thing, wow, we're never going to do the internet. And then I left there, went to a company called Loud Cloud in '99 and said, we're going to do this cloud thing. Government agencies, we're never doing cloud. So it's like every time you go to people and they're like, we're never going to do this. So open mind, you are going to do this. And it's either going to happen to you or with you. So you participate in this and don't let it just drop on your head. But I think that the important thing is to understand kind of what you have in your environment, where you can take advantage of existing stuff, as we talked about, and take advantage of a lot of these newer things like TIC 3.0, and identity guidance, and all these things that kind of give folks the ability to go do things.
Everything that Kevin said about SD-WAN can also apply to software-defined perimeter. The advantages in flexibility, the advantages in consumption model, et cetera. And I believe that from an implementability standpoint, thinking about what architecture is best going to serve both the short-term and the long-term goals, it's really easy to get focused on solving one problem as opposed to looking across the landscape and saying, we're going to solve this problem today in a way that builds into future problems. Personally, what I see is the ability to apply Zero Trust as a network security technology is much less implementable than the ability to apply it as an overlay. And the desire to do that securely means it might be good to focus on reducing the attack surface, looking for solutions that aren't necessarily dependent on an inbound listener, that aren't necessarily dependent on a single egress point with a bunch of backhaul. So I think that from an implementability standpoint, one of the key questions is, what do you have to build for yourself versus what can you look for in a technology partner in the industry that can build it for you?
Slightly different spin on that. We have, I think within government, we're all trying to find a value proposition for everything that we have to do. Though Treasury has money, we actually don't get it. It's a challenge, right? We're asking for more. Things cost more. We need more bandwidth. We're doing all these things, but we're getting less money to execute. So I think finding the value proposition is going to really impact the how you implement. And I think the culture of the leadership that's kind of holding those purse strings is also going to be part of the challenge, right? What's good enough in this moat and wall perimeter that I've had for the last 15 years, is it not good enough? Right? Where do I need to spend my money? So prioritizing resources is going to be our challenge there.
And I think that you have to kind of look at what your core competency is. What do you do for a living, right? I mean, it's that the whole. Why is cloud taken off? It's taken off because I don't need to rack servers anymore. I don't need to see lights blinking, right? I mean, it's not my core competence. It's not what I do day in and day out. The same thing's going to happen with 5G. And at some point, I'm not going to need to be in the network business anymore. I don't need to run pipe, and someone else will do all that stuff for me. Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, whoever that is. So You know, I learned this a long time ago. I did a consulting gig at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, and I remember going into their SOC, and their SOC looked like NASA and had all this stuff around. And at every station, they had this little thing of Ivory soap. And I asked Ted, my buddy, I said, well, why do you have Ivory soap at every station? He goes, at the end of the day, we have to realize we sell soap for a living. You know, we're not NASA, we're not a security company, we're not a technology company, so I have to remind my people that this is what we do day in and day out. So that's why these things are all happening, is because you don't, if you're not a technology or an IT company, you shouldn't have to build the whole stack. The whole stack, and you can get that from anywhere. That's plumbing, you know, and probably heresy to be at Cisco and saying that. Someone will probably beat me up, but you know, the network is plumbing. It's you know, the bits ride across the network, and that's awesome. We got to move bits, but at the end of the day, that's not how you make your security decisions. It's really not even how you make your infrastructure decisions.
You know, just the springboard off Lisa's comment earlier about that user experience. That's how we're going to sell Zero Trust if we're to be successful. We're going to show that, you know, instead of government furnished equipment with 5-factor authentication, hairpinning through and adding tons of latency, you know, we're going to say any device, anywhere, and, you know, a very simple authentication mechanism to get into that data. And then, of course, we're going to have better security because on the back end, what we're going to have is that more real-time monitoring, better behavioral analysis, and better ability to control the interaction between the user and the data. That's how we're going to get to sell Zero Trust. And if we don't do that collectively, government and industry, this will be another buzzword of the year, and then in 2 years we'll look back and say, hey, what happened to that Zero Trust thing?
Well, and culturally, we can't do that anymore, right? I mean, we're at the point now where everyone's got a computer in their pocket where they do biometric for their personal life and get their bank account information, do all this stuff. And if we give them less than that, then they will find a way to use that and work around this, right? That whole shadow IT thing everyone cares deeply about. So culturally, we're at a point where it's got to be this way, and it's got to be great user experience, because if it's not, users will find a way to get around it.
So one of the other things our white paper identified from a foundational perspective was that the need to understand, and we talked about this, the need to understand data and the need to interact with the mission is critical for a number of reasons. One being, we're talking about users will find a way around, but the first time we shut down the mission from being able to do their work is when Zero Trust is going to turn off. So, and this is a problem that we have today, right? Because if we had good relationships with our mission, and if we had a really good understanding of our data, a lot of our problems would be solved, right? Because we would know what our high value assets are, and we would be able to wrap security around them. So, what are you doing in your various organizations to understand where your data is and to have that relationship with the mission so that you can get that context? The example is, like, I don't go to the UK. If Darren shows up logging into our system from the UK, you should stop it. But we got people that do, right? So we have to understand that mission context. We can't shut down important business functions. So please, any advice you can provide?
Why don't you start this one, Steve?
Thanks. I'll go back to the data, not just what we would consider typical data. When we start talking about the users, and especially contextual access, there's a lot of areas there that are going to have to be unpacked, especially on the federal policy side and the agencies, because I can work through that easily. If I can talk to my HR folks and I can say, give me all the leave requests and let me know if there's travel requests also in the classified system if you hold the clearance, I'll be able to know very quickly if you're supposed to be in the UK or not, or frankly, even if you're on leave, which can help me build a confidence score to say, you know what, that could be Darren. Maybe we'll let him in the front door, but not in the kitchen. But getting access to that data and making it actionable is a huge challenge. Here again, does a vendor hold data, and can I get access to that data? And most agencies right now, especially outside of the security or the CIO shop, that answer is out no. And so when we start talking about the other sources of data we want, especially the personnel-related data, there's big Privacy Act implications of that, there's monitoring implications of that, there's HR implications of that, and these are big thorny policy pieces we're gonna have to work through to deliver that amazing user experience so we don't lock our people out when, yeah, actually I did have to travel to the UK because we just started a new business there.
I think the control plane right now is those of us sitting in the room, right? I mean, very few people have automated their infrastructure to look at and make those decisions. So our architecture is constrained by the control engine, that being me. So the ability to improve our analytics, to do some automation, will allow us to automate that control plane and make those decisions. And like the example Steve had with a leave request, wouldn't that be amazing intelligence in the process?
So for Steve and Jeff, from an agency advice perspective, what would you suggest that agencies do with regard to beginning to go down the zero trust route? Should they be doing this on their own internally? Should they be partnering with other agencies? What's the best approach?
Well, I don't know if it's the best approach. I mean, I think what we've done here with this paper will help introduce this concept into middle management, upper management within IT, you know, and not necessarily IT, but in the mission space, because those are a lot of times the people that are making the decisions on how to move this forward. I think that will help. Can't stress enough about understanding your data. And the more analytics you have, the quicker you can automate.
I'll say that one of the boons we have right now that we haven't necessarily had in the past is we have a president's management agenda that fits squarely into supporting this type of thinking and transition in information technology and security. President management agenda says three things. It says IT modernization, upgrade those legacy systems. It's an opportunity for all of us to take that chance to say, oh, you're changing the system? Let's talk about how we can start to fold elements of zero trust into that new redesign, whether it's a layer 3, layer 7, anywhere in between. We also have the data and accountability piece. I think we've made it abundantly clear data is very important in this conversation, and the accountability, how data drives accountability for a user accessing sensitive information and resources at the organization. And the third piece, which is vitally important, is workforce. I hope you've taken away that this is a different way of thinking about how we secure our organization and how we interact with the folks who consume our data and our users. And we're going to have to train folks to understand this way of thinking. In many cases, bring in skill sets we don't have. The last big hire I had was a data scientist on my contract side, because I'm awash in data and I've got lots of smart security folks, but I need folks who understand statistics to help separate the wheat from the chaff and then give that information to my security folks. So when we look at workforce, we have to be ready to think outside the traditional hiring spectrum and say, I need to bring in some skill sets that I may not have seen before.
So this question is for the whole panel, but with a slightly different focus for the two different groups that are here. So for the government, for industry that would like to be involved in supporting the zero trust effort within agencies, how would you suggest to go about that engagement? And then from industry, because I mean, obviously you're looking at it from the different direction, what do you think the government should be doing? And how would you work to engage with the federal government?
So I guess I'll start this one down here. So I encourage people to do research and read, right? There are a lot of good resources. I'm going to sell this paper all day. This paper is a great resource. It calls out some other references. It calls out the Google Beyond Court model. It calls out the Bradley Farber book, O'Reilly book on zero trust. Those are great resources. They're not Bibles and they're not cookbooks, right? So you're not, everything that you do with zero trust is going to be bespoke. It's going to be for your agency. But I would encourage you to get involved in the communities of interest. This is one. This is a very good one. There are others that exist out there, and figure out what other people are doing, right? I mean, everyone's dealing with the same sets of technology, right? There's we've got Microsoft and Google and Cisco and Palo Alto and Zscaler and all these different technologies. What's going to be different is going to be your policies. It's going to be your approaches to things. It's going to be your organization. Your organization is going to have kind of nuance and things within your org that you're going to have to deal with. So you can kind of get probably 60-70% from other folks, but the rest of it's going to be all you. So I would say invest, learn, figure out where your stuff's going, figure out how mobile fits in, figure out how all the compliance stuff we talked about fits in, and go and move.
In terms of engagement, I'd say on the federal side, we do have a federal working group. And if you're interested and you're a Fed, you want to be part of that, contact Jeff or myself. We'll get you plugged into the right people. Of course, on the ACT-IAC side, we have the cybersecurity community of interest and the networking community of interest. We're going to continue to drive in this space as well. And we're going to continue to look at what the next step in terms of zero trust is for ACT-IAC. Other ways to get engaged is there's also discussion in some of the CIO Council subgroups, especially the Shared Services Initiative group. So if you're a Fed and you have folks that participate, there's an opportunity there as well.
From the industry perspective, for me, if there's one fundamental truth that cuts across the private sector and the public sector, it's that people fear change, and rightly so. We've always done it this way. It works well enough. You're taking a chance on a new solution that may or may not work. And one of the only ways to get through that fear is finding the low-hanging fruit, looking for something that is well-scoped and well understood, and really focusing on solving a proof problem. Say, okay, we're going to dip our toe in the water, we're going to see if we get it bitten off. And if we don't, we can take that to the people who have really legitimate concerns. Say, this is what we can build for you. This is what we built to solve this problem. Let's talk about the problem you need to solve and how it relates to this and how it doesn't. So I think accepting that the fear is legitimate, and it really is something that we need to help people through, not just beat them into submission about. And that the way to do that is scoping and building credibility, because these are, some of them, very new to the government, even though they're very well tested in the industry, enterprise side of the house.
Yeah, and I can't agree enough about what Lisa just said. Find a quick win, find something where you can start and plant a flag and say this was a successful Zero Trust implementation around one application, Salesforce, whatever it is, Workday, whatever you guys are using. Find one that you can point to and then move forward from there, right? Because the other problem we tend to fall into, right, is we all think too much. So we're scared of change, and we think too much, and we try to solve the entire problem. And then we look at it and go, wow, that's pretty daunting. And next thing you know, we spend 18 months looking at it, and the entire industry has changed. So don't do that.
I agree. What they've said, 100% support. I think from a federal perspective, you have to be willing to try a pilot, right? I mean, we're not so good at that. I think that's kind of proven over the years. But the technology, and truthfully, I think we have a lot more experience and knowledge now, at least my experience, and I think the COIs can help there, but in contracting for it, right? I think that's been one of our stumbling blocks in the past, is contracting for this type of a pilot or different things. So I think we have a lot more knowledge and interest in doing it.
So just as a follow-up to that, are there any opportunities? And it's me that was at a conference last week, and started to say, within tech circles, there's the idea of failing fast, right? And the idea is we can fail in government, except fail slow and with lots of documentation, right? So, are there any opportunities here to partner with other organizations for industry to provide any sort of opportunities to innovate quickly, or are there any avenues for acquisitions, so that, like you said, Sean, where rather than waiting until the technology is already, you're making a purchase for technology where the new version is already out. How do we get ahead of that and actually purchase the right Zero Trust technology then?
Yeah, so I think there are a few of those, and I'm sure Steve and Jeff probably chime in on others. But I know on the DoD side they have a thing called OTAs, and OTAs are this other transaction authority where they can kind of move quicker. It reminds me a little bit about what DUIX is doing and DARPA used to do, which is I can bring in some technology, do a pilot, bring in, try it out, and do different things. So find things like that, right? It's always, and reach out to industry too. So industry is willing to do pilots and do POCs and to help out in scoping and architecture. I think one of the other things we want to do is we want to try to bring this up into some kind of open standards way, right? You're looking, the best way to get these things and us all talking the same language is do open standards. There's a really cool thing happening with identity now with FIDO. FIDO moving into W3C, W3C kind of informing some of the things NIST is doing around identity. So participate in that stack, because again, the more that this is open standards, the more that we all speak the same language and we all kind of do the same thing, the better it is for everybody, because then we all interoperate and we're all happy.
Maybe leveraging managed services, cloud services, that subscription-based consumption model to say, okay, in order to do a pilot, you don't have to buy a set of appliances, deploy them, rack and stack them, configure them. You can sign up for a short term, you can sign up for a small community of people, kick the tires on it, and if it meets your needs, expand from there. And if not, there hasn't been a huge investment in something that you've now got a sunk cost in.
Yep. That's the great thing about cloud, is that we're all just kind of out there, right? So you can just turn it on, 5 minutes later it all just kind of works.
On the contracting side, especially on the federal side, we have to spend some time with our acquisition folks, helping them understand that when we build out contracts, we need options and we need capabilities in those contracts to leverage zero trust, especially when we have disparate pieces of maturity and capability. So I might order something on EIS today, and I'm going to say, yes, I want software defined, and I want software defined networking as part of my network on EIS. But then I also want to make sure that down the road, when I have a mature zero trust engine that can fetch that control plane, that they'll interface and they'll talk to each other. And so being somewhat forward thinking in your acquisitions about how does this piece of the puzzle or how does this acquisition fit into the zero trust model, not just today when I'm executing my contract, but 5 years down the road when I'm executing the last option, that's going to be very beneficial, but that's very hard to do. And it's going to take a lot of work on the government side with the technology folks sitting down with the contracting officers to help them recognize this vision.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to work with the business units too, right? This is one thing that on the commercial side they do pretty well. But a lot of times business units will go out and do their own thing, right? And then they'll say, hey, I get this need, and I'll go contract with this cloud service. It's a subscription. It's a couple bucks per user per month. Who cares? And a lot of times the higher order doesn't even know that's happening, right? So the CISO doesn't know that's happening, the CIO doesn't know that's happening, and 8 months later, 10 months later, 12 months later, it's all just kind of happening. So find those, work with the business units, figure out how you can make those zero trusty. And those are usually the easy ones because someone just went out and picked a cloud service because it was easy and they could turn it on in 5 minutes. So find those as kind of your quick wins, which may already be happening.
Absolutely. I think it's the risk, government employees, especially I found that contracting officers are very adverse to risk. So it's moving through that discussion and understanding that failure is part of the discussion because of what we're talking about here. And I think it's a needed concept to push through the contracting officers arena.
Dan Kaminsky said something on Twitter the other day that just totally struck me. And he said there's only one truly wrong idea. And the only truly wrong idea is that it's not okay to fail. Because if you hold that idea, it holds you back in so many ways. I think that getting that past a procurement group can be a challenge,
Yeah.
but helping them to really be comfortable in that arena is one of the biggest obstacles.
So we're at that point where we can open up the room to questions. So does anyone have any questions for the panel?
Long way.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for being on the board. Thanks so much for presenting today. Some really good information there. As I'm reflecting back on everything that was just said, where I need some help and maybe some clarity, we talk about zero trust and we talk about it as a little bit of a nebulous. There's a lot of things it can be. And then we talked briefly about TIC and TIC 3.0, and I see that as being very structured, and I understand how that works. And I think about some of the public servants that I'm working with, like Jim Russo at GSA. So he's a great guy, and he's trying to meet his friends at OMB. He's trying to meet a lot of different people's expectations. And so at the end of the day, what I'm trying to understand is, do you see zero trust as a methodology to meeting mandated TIC requirements, or do you think the government's going to use zero trust for other use cases, I guess? And if so, what specifically do you think they would be? Because I think we touched on it at the end there, which was when we get to the procurement process, how do we do it? How do we nail this down so that the government understands they got something good? And I think that's where Jim Russo struggles at the end of the day. He's not here, but I'll speak for him.
So I think zero trust to me is the compensating control for the security requirements that TIC.0 was trying to make by bringing people in back to the network to do all the scanning in the Einstein and everything they were doing. So now we're not doing that anymore. We're letting people go direct to cloud based upon use cases, but we need a compensating control. We need a similar level of security. So that's what, to me, what zero trust brings.
So it'll move outside mandated TIC requirements, basically, or expand beyond that. Is that what we're saying?
It'll be the security mechanism for the TIC requirements. The TIC requirements are the business use cases. Here's how I get to things, and the zero trust is here's how I protect the things I'm trying to get to.
So I'll give you a response. This is personal response, not department head, not CISO council, anything like that. So TIC, the whole point of TIC is inspection,
Right.
and in some way being able to control preventing or an ongoing attack. When we look at zero trust, it's so much more than that, because we're talking about the fundamental way that we allow access, which TIC has nothing to do with access other than you must traverse this physical location for inspection. But short of that, TIC really does nothing in terms of understanding access control and understanding how a user is asserting themselves to say, I want to get to this data. And that's where, frankly, as long as we can provide equivalent or better, which I think we can, visibility into that inspection, which I think the Small Business Administration is an example of somebody that's done a great job of that. I think that the folks at DHS and OMB are going to be A-OK with that. But we have to show that, no, you're getting better visibility into what's happening in that interaction than what you had with the old standard TIC model.
And you're getting better performance too, because one of the challenges with that, depending on who you are and what government agency and where you are in the world, coming back to a data center in the US and then going back out to wherever you are in the world is not the most optimal path for network traffic.
And would you agree as well that I think when I was listening to obviously what Lars Dan was saying earlier today is the agencies aren't going to modernize all at once so much. So I may move email or something, one component over that. So without zero trust, I feel like I'm lost. I can do that. I'm just trying to understand exactly how to mandate it. Do you agree with that? That's how I see the agencies moving, right?
There's a really interesting consideration there too, because zero trust as it was initially defined was only ever focused on users accessing privately managed internal applications. But that's not the only problem we have to solve. We're allowing users to access email or resources that are not internally managed. Then we have to apply the same concepts from zero trust to that externally oriented traffic as well. And for me, this is why if I could go back in time and flip a bit, one of the many bits I would flip would be to change the term zero trust to context-based trust. Because it's not just whether you're on or off the network that we decide whether we trust you, it's also what applications, whether the application is internal or external. So I think that as organizations are making these gradual transitions, that zero trust technology, solutions that deliver zero trust technology or functionality will deliver the kind of visibility and control that you need as you move away from the legacy model, the backhaul model, to bring it all here to inspect it. No, we need to inspect it as it goes out. We need to get in line with the data rather than forcing the data to come through us.
Yeah, think of zero trust as your security companion on your cloud journey, right? It's the, and Lisa brought up a great point. I mean, zero trust has been around for a while, and it didn't make as much sense, and the reason why it's kind of caught on in the last couple of years is because it's, oh, cloud. Look at all the stuff we're doing in the cloud. Government agencies, they're all starting with email. It's always email first. Office 365, getting off of Exchange, getting rid of those servers, that's the first thing I do. But that's not the last thing you do. There's a lot of other cloud services, because then you're making those build versus buy decisions. You're figuring, okay, if I outsource my email, why don't I outsource my ERP? I don't need a bunch of servers with lights blinking running ERP in my data center. I can do that somewhere else. And then again, zero trust is kind of the inevitable security infrastructure for all of those conversations.
And I'd say when you're looking at your procurements specifically, give the vendors the option. Say, we need to meet TIC in some way, shape, or form. If you want to hairpin and do the old model and propose it, go ahead, but we're going to evaluate that as part of your overall proposal. If you want to propose something new, and perhaps that's even an option, you're going to play it safe and say, sure, I'll comply with the old model, but here's my proposal for a new model as an option. That's a great way to approach it. And ask the vendors to innovate in that space while still giving them the chance that if for whatever reason DHS is held up or OMB is slow on approving the use cases, you still have a way forward with them.
Yeah, and the change in TIC was inevitable, right? I mean, you look at TLS 1.3 and some of the things that are happening, all that stuff was not going to be able to persist forever. It had to change.
Okay, we are actually at the end. We don't have any time for any further questions. So for the panel, if you could just provide your parting comments based on the white paper, based on your experience, what would you leave the group with?
This is going to be a team sport. It's going to be data focused. And it will take industry and government working together to continue to mature this space. We still have a lot of work to do. I think DIACT has put out a great initial framework to facilitate that conversation, and I think our next opportunity is really evolving and maturing that framework to its next logical.
we are better positioned to solve the problems we ever have been. Technology is finally catching up with our problem space. And I'm very optimistic that white papers like this that help to introduce these new concepts, that public-private partnerships that help to build these new models are really what's going to take us into the future.
I would say use the resources that you have to help sell this and move this concept through your agency and through your organization. Stephen, I, and the panel here, and your peers in the crowd, right? All part of the family that can help move this through an organization to get it sold.
I would say ditto to everyone else said. Right? It is a team sport, and we're all in this together. It is evolving, always take into account, as Lisa pointed out earlier, the end user experience, because we're living in a pretty interesting time with end users, where they have this really high expectation of privacy, a high expectation of usability, and all that stuff has to be part of the mix and part of the conversation.
Thank you, panel, for your time. Please read the white paper, and please make sure that you have the opportunity to volunteer your time with the Cyber COI and the Network COI. Thank you.